Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a hybrid educational program here at Cancer Support Community South Bay. My name is Rebecca, and I'm the program manager here. Before we do get started, if this is your first time joining us, CSC South Bay's mission is to ensure that all people impacted by cancer are empowered by knowledge, strengthened by action, and sustained by communities that no one faces cancer alone. We serve the South Bay, Long Beach, and Orange County area all at no cost. Our program includes support groups, networking groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs like this workshop. Educational programs are open to all. If you'd like to hear more about our services or join our community, please visit our website at cscsouthbay.org. So this workshop today is about successful aging. What is it? Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our workshop speaker. Helen Dennis is a nationally recognized leader in the areas of aging and the new retirement with academic, corporate, and nonprofit experience. She has received numerous awards for her teaching at the USC Davis School of Gerontology for her contributions to the field of aging and literary arts. As a syndicated columnist on successful aging for the Southern California News Group, she has published over 1,000 columns, reaching 1.2 million readers weekly. She has been recognized by PBS Next Avenue as one of the 50 influencers in aging. So we do have a lot of people here in person and online. So for any questions, we'd appreciate it if you could put it into the chat for those online. And for those in person, you can just take a mental note and we will get to as many as we can. Helen, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, hello, everyone. Well, and hello to those who are here in person, which is wonderful, and also those who are with us online. So we're going to talk about successful aging and what is it. But before we do that, I want to start with a story. And this is a story about the Pope who visited Cuba and met with Fidel Castro. Well, you see, they were both walking along a seawall when a huge gust of wind blew the Pope's little cap off, which landed into the sea. Well, Fidel was known as a most gracious host, so he leaped to the rescue. He jumped over the seawall, striding across the waves until he reached the cap. He grabbed it. He went back across the water until he reached the Pope and placed the damp little cap on the Pope's head. Well, this incident took place among 3,000 journalists. The headlines in the Cuban daily newspaper read, Fidel actually performs a miracle. He walks on water. The daily newspaper from the Vatican had a very different lead. Their lead was, the Pope is a miracle worker. He makes Fidel walk on water. But the Miami Herald had a very different lead. Their lead was, aging Fidel cannot swim. So perception is really important. And our perception of aging is also very important. So many of us think of ourselves a little younger than our age. Whoops, this should not. Here we go. And Bernard Baruch said it very well. He says, to me, old age is always 15 years older than I am, okay? And there's actually a lot of evidence that most people on most occasions think they're a little bit younger than their chronological age. So you've got the chronological age, was the number of years you live. Then you have the subjective age, which is how old you feel. Now, there's some days where your subjective age could even be a little more than your chronological age on occasion, but most often people feel a little younger than their actual age. So let's talk about aging. What do we know about aging? So one of the things we know is that aging is a very gradual process, okay? So let me give you an example. George Burns, I don't know if any of you remember him as a comedian. Yes, we are of age. Most of us, we remember George Burns. Okay, so George Burns, who died at the age of 101, he was 93 years old, and he goes to his doctor, and he says, Doc, last night, I really felt great, but this morning I got up, my left leg absolutely killing me. It is swollen, it is inflamed, I can't walk on it. So what's my problem, Doc? The doc looks at him and says, Mr. Burns, you're 93 years old. But Burns says, my right leg is 93 years old too. Okay. So it says, when we visit our physicians, we can ask a few questions about aging. And if we say, well, Mrs. Jones, what do you expect? You're getting older. You can say, well, could you tell me a little bit more about that? So remember, Burns's legs both are aging at the same time. One of the things we also know that if there's a symptom that comes on very quickly, that usually suggests pathology. That usually is not normal, regular aging. So we want to separate normal aging from anything that could be pathology. That's really quite different. So the other thing that we know is everybody ages at a different rate, okay? That means it's at a different rate at which we have losses. So then, does that mean that you have to be perfectly healthy to age successfully? So the answer is no, and I'm going to read you a quote from recent literature. Recent studies have suggested, quote, that the absence of disease and disability is not the most important element of successful aging, and people with chronic disease also can age successfully. I think that's a very, very important message, okay? So let's talk about some models of successful aging. So this goes back to 1998. John Rowe and Robert Kahn wanted to explore aging a little bit differently than other researchers, because until then, most of the research in aging was about the declining process. Why do we lose functioning? Why do we lose cells? Why do we become slower? So Rowe and Kahn came along and says, we want to ask a different question. We want to know, what can we learn from people who do this well? So they followed 1,000 people who were considered, quote, successful agers. They put together a committee of 16 researchers, and they followed these people for a period of 8 years. So they learned something. They learned something about what these people had in common. And what you have in front of you is the model that they came up with. So these were 3 components that these successful agers said they had in common. So the first thing they said, they avoided disease and disability. I'm not sure you wake up one morning and you say, this morning I'm going to avoid disease and disability. I'm not sure it works that way, but what they were really talking about was avoiding the risk factors to disease and disability. So what do you think are risk factors to disease and disability? Let me hear from you. What's a risk factor? Environment. The environment is one, and we certainly are surrounded by that today. What's another one? Environment, yes? Say it again. Oh, nutrition, absolutely. Nutrition is a risk factor. Give me another one. Smoking. Smoking is a huge risk factor. Other risk factors for disease and disability. I'm sorry, raise your hand, I can't find you. Say it again. Drinking, excessive drinking, definitely a risk factor. Stress, huge risk factor. So what these folks were saying is they could avoid the risk factors that led to disease and disability. So that was one. The second, they all shared the characteristic of being highly engaged in cognitive and physical activity. So what do you think that meant? What did that mean? Say it again louder. Do your exercise, be physically active. What else were they were saying? Yes.
Gardening, social gathering.
Gardening, social gathering. What else?
Learning new things.
Learning, the cognitive aspects, learning new things. So that was the second characteristic. But then they had a third one. They said they were engaged with life. So what did that mean? So there are actually two components. One was that they were involved in relationships that were reciprocal. There was a give and take in a conversation. And the other part of it was that they were engaged in meaningful, productive activities. Well, that could be volunteering, okay? That could be taking care of a loved one where there is a reciprocity and also you are doing something that was meaningful and important. It could be working, it could be a number of things, but those two components, a reciprocal relationship and doing something that is meaningful. Their book, which was called Successful Aging, really went on to something else. There has been decades of discussion to say, well, what really leads to aging? What's the biggest influence? Is it our genetics or is it our lifestyle? Well, they studied identical twins for a period of number of years. And what they found when it came to physical aging, 70% was lifestyle, 70% was lifestyle, 30% was genetics. When it came to cognition, it was about 50-50. So what is the message here? If 70%, and again, these are averages, if 70% of declines in physical ability due to aging is due to lifestyle, what's the message? There's a message that we can do something about that. Exactly. We can do something about that. That's a really strong message. Probably it's one you all know already, but often research sometimes just affirms what you intuitively know. And this certainly was the case. So aging can be what I call a bad news, good news story. Okay. So the bad news is that aging is a declining process. Okay. We each age at different rates, but aging is a decline. That's the bad news. So what's the good news? And I think you mentioned it.
A very powerful decision factor in how we're going to do that, gracefully or ungracefully.
Yeah, exactly. So we have some decisions to make, graceful or not gracefully, that we have some influence. Okay. And we probably have much more influence than we know. So let's talk about some things that we know as part of normal aging. And let's start with stress. Okay. Can anyone identify with stress? If you are alive today, you can identify with stress. Okay. Wherever you live, whatever your lifestyle, whatever your political orientation is, you can identify with stress. Okay. So there was an experiment done many years ago on young mice and old mice, which sounds like it doesn't make sense, but they were young mice and old mice. And what the researchers did is this is unappetizing after lunch, but they inserted a thermometer in their gut, okay? And then they put these mice, young and old, into the refrigerator, and that was the stressor. Then they took the mice out of the refrigerator, and they looked at the time it took for them to reach what's called a homeostatic level. How long did it take for them to get their temperature back to normal? So who got there first, the young ones or the old ones? The young ones, okay. So you can say, well, we're not mice, what's the relevance here? Well, there is some relevance to humans. We know that with age, it takes longer to recover from stress. I'll use myself as an example. If I fly to the East Coast, do whatever I do, come back to the West Coast, and the next morning I think I'm going to do something clever. I'm going to write a column. I'm going to do something real creative. In reality, I make phone calls and I sort my paper clips. So what we know is that it takes time. It takes time to recover from stress. And it could be stress from a cold. It could be stress from family tensions. It could be any kind of stress. It takes time. So if we know that, what's the intervention? What do we do about that piece of information, that piece of knowledge?
Take time to do it.
So seems so logical, doesn't it? I have a hard time learning that lesson. I know it intellectually, but to say, all right, this has been a highly stressful, give yourself a break, just give yourself a break. And yes, Rebecca.
A line that is a privilege to grow old.
It is a privilege to go old. It is. I think there can be moments in time when you can say, I'm not so sure. We get through those times, but indeed, thank you for the comment. So what else do we know? That's a little bit about stress. So let's talk about body composition. Again, this is what we call normal or usual aging. So one of the things we know is between the ages, and again, between ages 35 and 65, and again, these are averages. It depends if you're male or female in your body type. But between the ages of 35 and 65, if we do not decrease our calories and we do not increase our exercise, we will, on average, gain a pound a year. Okay. Now, in addition, that during that period of time, we will lose a half a pound of lean muscle tissue and fatty tissue will take its place. So if we get on the scale between 35 and 65, we've done nothing different. We go on the scale, haven't weighed ourselves in 30 years, we will gain on average 30 pounds. Okay. And in addition to 30 pounds, it'll be 15 more pounds, which we have of fat. All right. So that's not a great story. That's not a great story. Okay. So the other thing we know is fat redistributes with age. I'm not sure why, but this is particularly among women. We tend to get character lines to show that we have lived a full life. Okay. Character lines. And for some reason, the fatty tissue below our facial skin reappears in our hips. I don't know if any of you noticed that. All of a sudden, the trousers are a little bit too tight, and just that is a mystery. We don't know why it moves that way. The other thing we know is fat redistributes with age. If you look at an older hand, my case in point, an older hand, you might notice that the veins seem to be a little more prominent, right? Skin is a little more wrinkly. I don't know if any of you can identify. But what we know is that we lose fatty tissue under the skin. And at the same time, fat tissue increases around our internal organs. So we know fat redistributes with age. But if we know that this weight gain is a thing, what's the intervention? So if we know that's part of aging, that you can gain weight, also metabolism slows down, which we know. What's the intervention? What do we do about that?
Exercise.
We have to increase our exercise. And what do we decrease? The calories. Yeah, decrease the calories, increase the exercise. Everybody is a little bit different, but that's really the intervention. Say it again.
Decreasing the calories.
Oh, the portions. The portions are very, very important. That is definitely important. So speaking of losing a weight, what do you have to do? What do you have to do to lose weight? Besides take the magic pills and the magic injections. So we know there's 3,500 calories in a pound. And if we want to lose 150 calories, that's one apple. What do we have to do? We have to go for a bike ride for 6.8 miles, okay? We have to swim. Wait a minute, that's a long trip. We have to swim for 20 minutes, okay? We have to walk for 1.5 miles or jog for 1 mile. So is exercise in itself a way to lose weight? It will help, but we got to do a lot of exercises to lose 3,500 calories, which is 1 pound. If all of this is for an apple, I mean, we're not talking about pecan pie. We're talking about an apple, okay? We're talking about an apple. Okay. So what else do we know? What else do we know? Okay, so we've talked about body composition. Wait a second, stress, we've done. Okay, so let's talk about bone growth. So one of the things we know that with aging, that certain bones calcify and get a little bigger. For example, the top of the bone at the top of your spine gets a little larger, so it looks like the bottom of your skull and your spine looks like it's shorter. And just anyone ever go to Florida? Anyone been to Florida? Yeah. Anyone observe older drivers, and sometimes they can't see over the steering wheel? I don't know if you've ever seen that. Well, sometimes their body shrinks, but also, things are a little lower. So we know that's the case. We also know the hips get a little bigger. Okay. Now this is not exactly a bone, but the cartilage on your nose gets a little bit bigger. And although, again, this is not exactly a bone, but the earlobes get a little longer. I used to think that's because of diamond earrings, but I understand that is not the case. Okay. That's all part of what we call normal or usual aging. But the real question is, do any of these physical changes affect our creativity, our knowledge, our relationships, our aspirations, our work? When does it affect us? When does it affect us?
Well, when you your self-esteem and you change your personality.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
When you diminish your self-esteem by recognizing what happens, and that as a late effect is your social interaction first. Second, your need to do the doctor visit more frequently to offset the changes. And third, to find peace and harmony on the organ and pavilion.
The beautiful answer, it's really affecting our self-esteem, and that also affects our doctor appointments and what we do with our life. So it really affects us when we allow it to affect us. However, we live in Hollywood, okay? We live in the beautiful people where, at least in Southern California, for 10 months of the year, people walk around with very little clothing. So it's very hard. And I think part of our challenge is to say, we will not accept those stereotypes of older age. We will not accept that to affect our self-esteem. So I want to talk about, very briefly, a book that was written by an epidemiologist at Yale, and her name is Becca Levy. And Becca Levy did a study on just this. She compared two groups of older adults, one who had a very positive attitude about aging and how they were aging, and the other who had a rather negative attitude. She found, and she repeated the study very often, she found that those who had a positive attitude lived 7.5 years longer than those who did not. And I see someone in our group is nodding, and you sound like you know about that study. You're aware of it?
No, just, I've read about Buddhist philosophies and just really how much our attitude determines our life condition. So it just reminds you.
So yes, the attitude counts. And what she also noticed among these people who had a more positive attitude, they performed better physically and cognitively. They were more likely to recover from severe disability. Their memory was better. They walked faster, and she found they lived longer. So that's a very powerful finding. There are other intervening variables, there's no question about it. But this power of attitude towards aging is really quite remarkable. So that's our story on bone growth. But let's talk about the topic of dehydration. So another thing we know is that part of normal aging is that the connective tissue in our joints tend to shrink, okay? They tend to lose water. So when that happens to a sponge, what happens to the sponge? It shrinks, it gets brittle. Now, those who are able to stand, I'd like you to all to stand up for a moment. We're going to do a little exercise. And those who are watching at home or in an office, please join us. Okay. So I'd like you to give yourself enough space and both extend your right and your left arm. Now, wiggle your fingers on your right arm so we all know. Okay, right arm. I'd like you, without bending your elbow, move your right arm over to your left arm as far as it'll go without bending your elbow. Okay. Okay, very good. Everyone sit down. You've done a good job with that. If you ask a 10-year-old, to do that, they will, I can't do it, with a total straight arm, will be able to move all the way over. So youth is on their side, but what that says to us is that even at our life stage, that connective tissue is shrinking a little bit. So if we know that's part of normal aging, what is the intervention?
Yoga.
Well, that is really close. Most people, what would, hold your answer. What would most people say? Drink water, right? Well, that's very important, but actually it's stretching.
Yes.
And yoga certainly does that, but it is stretching to increase our flexibility, which becomes very important as we get older. Well, let's go to another one, the eye syndrome. One of the things we know as we get older, that food is not, the nutrients of food are not absorbed as well as when we were younger. So we know that there's less acid secreted in the stomach, there's less water in the large and small intestines, and we know that sodas and Krispy Kremes are not going to quite do it for us at this life stage. So what does the USDA recommend? So what they recommend, if we look at a normal plate, they recommend that 60% of our plate, 30% of our plate is grains, 30% is vegetables, 20% fruit, and 20% protein. If we want to make it easy, you can just look at quarters, and dairy is at a minimal. So they also report that in 2024, which is so hard to believe, 3/4 of Americans, 3/4 are either obese or overweight. That is astounding. I have to say, when I gave this presentation last year, it was 2/3. Something happened this past year. 3/4, and we know obesity and overweight is a risk factor. We talked about it earlier, is a risk factor for disease and disability. So we have an excess of sodium, saturated fats, refined grains, and calories from solid and added sugars. So I'm sure most of you are aware of some of these nutritional things, but again, it's just validated what we as a society are really faced with incredible challenges. And that obesity rate goes to kids as well. So going to see increase in diabetes and a number of other things. So clearly the intervention is what? Eating well, eating according to the healthy plate. Okay. So let's talk about something else. Let's talk about sleep. Sleep. Yeah. Grown, we all say sleep. How many people have some difficulty sleeping? Okay. Not unusual in our life stage because there are changes. There are changes in something called their circadian rhythms, which is a biological function that happens every 24 hours. There is such a thing as sleep disorders, as you probably know, like sleep apnea. So those are real things. But what we know about older adults is we spend less time in deep sleep, which is the most important sleep for restorative sleep and rest. We also tend, and again, this is not everyone, to fall asleep earlier and to get up earlier, okay? Not everyone. Some of us get up a little bit later, okay? But I would observe, my parents retired to Florida, and there were many older women who lived alone and did not like to go out at night, which I can understand. But they went to bed at 8 o'clock at night. Well, if you go to sleep at 8 o'clock at night, you're going to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning because you've already had 7 hours of sleep. So I thought one of the challenges is what can keep you up at night, engaged so that you can go to bed, go to sleep at a reasonable hour, and also get up when the rest of the world gets up. So let's talk about brain changes. One of the things we know, part of normal aging, is that we lose neurons. We lose brain cells, part of normal aging, okay? And we have some changes in short-term memory. And I know also at this life stage, we also worry, say, oh my God, I lost my keys. Is this the first sign of dementia? Well, I always like to say there's a difference between misplacing your keys and forgetting how to drive, okay? Those are two different cognitive experiences, all right? So there is actually some good news, a lot of good news on cognition, and that is learning anything new develops new neural pathways in our brain. So not only is lifelong learning something good, it's interesting, but that's brain healthy. But learning something new, it could be a new way, a new path in your walking or driving. It could be learning a language. It could be some of the crossword puzzles. But learning anything new is brain healthy. So again, we may be doing this automatically, but as you're learning, know that you're doing something very, very good. So that is really the intervention. We know learning in itself improves cognition. I want to go back to exercise. So if you were to ask me, what is the one thing we can do to slow the normal aging process, but there's only one, I would say exercise. So what do we know? It increases flexibility, right? With stretching, we'll be able to be more flexible. It increases strength. If we lose muscle mass, we lose strength. Now, what happens when you lose strength? Can't get up out of a chair, right? Your mobility is affected. Your gait is affected. Your balance is affected. Your ability to get off the floor after playing with a grandchild is affected, okay? So strength training, strength is absolutely, I would say, critical. I wish, dream come true, that when any of us went to our primary physician after the age of, give it 60, that on that prescription pad would be strength training. I think we could avoid a lot of physical therapy appointments. We could avoid a lot of accidents if we just had part of we brush our teeth, okay, we use floss, and we do strength training. I would love to see that on a prescription pad. The other thing is exercise helps us maintain endurance. It gets the blood flowing, the oxygen goes to all parts of our body, so it helps us maintain endurance. It helps us keep that ratio of lean and fat tissue, okay? And also, they found that exercising with someone also can decrease anxiety and depression. So exercise does a lot of things. It does a lot of things. But we might, and I hope we do not, adhere to the quote that a former president at the University of Chicago said. And he said, oh, exercise, oh, exercise. When I become overwhelmed with that feeling, I just lie down until that feeling goes away. So that's one way. A number of years ago, I had an opportunity to speak to a Dr. Walter Bortz, who is a noted geriatrician from Stanford. And he wrote a book, Dare to be 100. And in this book, there were 99 ways to get to be 100. So I said, Dr. Bortz, I said, of all these ways to reach to 100, what is the most important? So I'm thinking exercise, nutrition, have a sense of purpose, social connectedness. He said, no. The most important thing is to believe that you can age to 100. He said, once you believe that, everything else follows. I thought that was an important message.
The motivation.
Yeah, exactly. So once we say, that's really where I want to be, given I have health and I have my mental faculties and I'm reasonably healthy. That's one of the goals. He said, if you think that, if you think that, then all those other steps will follow. And I thought that was an important message. He also really emphasized strength training. One of the things he mentioned, he said, one of the indicators, and this is one of many indicators of whether someone goes into a nursing home, again, this is only one indicator, is whether they can get up out of a chair. And he said, that is very much, one, you have to be motivated to say, I want to get up out of the chair. But also he said, that very much is strength training. And he said, one of the things we can fight against in older age is frailty. Now, some people get frail for a number of reasons that have nothing to do with aging, but I'm only talking about aging. And he said, when that frailty is related to aging because of muscle, that we can do something about. So the conversations with Dr. Bortz were very empowering, very empowering. So let's move on and talk about another topic. There are some who would believe that with age, we become less creative. You know, if we say, well, we have Steve Jobs, we have Mark Zuckerberg, we have all of these tech geniuses who did these remarkable things in their 20s, when they were 18, when they were in college. So Gene Cohen, who was a psychiatrist who passed away a number of years ago at George Washington University, he took a very different view on this. He felt age was an asset. He thought age was an asset in development. But the other thing he said is that in later life, we may produce fewer creative works, but what we create may be our masterpieces. They may be the best that we can do, okay? And there are a number of artists that we can look at, and a number of people who are very creative in their later years. Henri Matisse, he was 81 years old. He was confined to his bed. He painted, and he was blind, and he painted with his long stick, and he created those magnificent cutouts. Okay. We have Ethel Percy Andrus, who at 72, she was the force behind establishing the nation's first health insurance plan for older adults. And at 74, she founded AERP and became its first president. Then we have John Muir, who was a naturalist. He wrote the book, My First Summer, at the age of 73. And then we have Norman Lear, who died at 101. At his death, he had several projects he was working on. Good Times, Who's the Boss, etc. And then we have Winston Churchill, who won the Nobel Prize at 79. Martha Graham was a choreographer. She danced until she was 75, choreographed her last work at 96. But what Gene Cohen said, we all can't be the big creators. But he said we all can be the little creators of planting a garden, the little creators of writing a letter to a loved one, the little creators who are developing a new fundraiser for the cancer support group. He said we all have innately that inner creativity, and that age is not a limitation, okay? Age is really an asset. So I like to quote and end with the quote from Charles Schulz, that great philosopher. So Schulz said, you know, life is a 10-speed bicycle, and most of us have gears we never use, or we never knew we even had, okay? So I think the overall message of my time together with you is that aging is a declining process. Aging is natural. Aging is gradual. That we don't have to be the victims of aging. That we will never have full control. That's a dream, folks. It never happened. But we have far more influence in our lifestyle, in our attitude, in our behaviors, in our engagements, to push the downside of aging as far out as possible. When I'm 120, God willing, I probably will be a bit frail, probably at 120, but we can push this notion of decline and frailty out as far as we can to 100. Okay. Not at 60, not at 70, not at 80, not at 90. And I think this is the challenge for each of us as individuals, not only on the messages that we internal that our own messages, but the messages we get from society. We live basically, essentially, in an ageist society. We've come a long way. Age discrimination in the workplace is illegal. We have come a long way. But I think it was AERP, recent study, they found in the workplace, 2/3 of workers find they either observe or have been subject to age discrimination. So I look at us as the warriors in this whole space to actually redefine what aging means, to be role models, not only for our peers, but for the next generation after us. So I thank all of you. It's wonderful to be with you. And I think we're open now to some questions.
Thank you so much, Helen. For those online, please feel free to put your questions into the chat or just unmute yourself and that'll signal to me that you would like to ask a question. But we can start with in-person first, and then just a reminder to repeat the question again for those online. Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
How do you feel about the advancement of the technology that AI is taking over your creativity, such as writing a letter? AI can write a letter, and here you go. You may just do a little editing. I mean,
the question is, how do I feel about AI and creativity? I think we have to be very discerning. You're right. If we want to write a letter and we don't know where to begin, we can go to AI. I think recipients are soon going to figure out whether this really came from your heart or whether it came from machine generation. University faculty are dealing with this. How do I determine whether this paper is an AI generated one? So I think it's a challenge. AI will never have the heart and soul that we have, will never, ever take the place of a brain that we have 100%. But it's going to be a challenge to us. I think the challenge is to be more creative than usual, to be discerning. And there's nothing wrong with getting an idea from AI to explore. And I think that's a very useful tool. But I think it's a challenge, particularly people in the creative industries. I think the Hollywood creative industry is very challenged by it. So I think you raise an important point that we have to be discerning. We have to be discerning. And I think more people who are aware of AI will be able to distinguish whether it is your language or machine generated. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, yes, sir.
I have the idea that I want to live my life like a candle, burning bright until the end, whether it's 70 or 100, 120. We've talked about old age, aging as being a degenerative process, but what can you suggest about keeping the candle bright all the way to the end?
How do we keep, you've heard that. Okay, so how do we keep the candle bright to the end? It takes intention. Okay, there's a saying, we want to add life to years, not years to life. Okay, so if we ascribe to adding life to years, I think it's an intention. And I think if we can be as physically and cognitively as fit as possible, if we can surround ourselves with what I call good people, if we are engaged with life, if we want to continue learning, if we are able to do the things we love to do, things that really stir our passion, things that really get us up in the morning, I think that's possible to however long that is. And I think most of us would share that view. to keep the candle burning bright as long as possible. But I think it's an intention. I'm not sure it happens automatically. I think it's saying something, 2025, this is really what I want to do. So thank you. It's a good question. Yes.
I have a good suggestion for all of us when we go out and go home to pass the suggestions to others. I just returned from losing my mother at age 96. So she was really getting old enough to realize technology might be something she can skip or she can slalom through. In November, Red Cross offered to everybody over 90 the possibility to get an Alexa, speaking about artificial intelligence. For people living alone or are not in a community, having a voice, having the choice of having a conversation on a device, it's a new challenge to program your brain actually that you are not alone. And that's the magic. You are not alone and you have to stay curious.
And we have to take what?
To stay curious.
We have to stay curious, yes.
You have to stay curious. She asked, how do I handle it? Because I barely can see. 12 people asked the same question. Alexa organized in the largest hotel in the capital of the little island a luncheon with a presentation like you offered, a presentation for people to understand Alexa concept, to participate, interacting, so when they go home and have their device, they can have fun. And that was the motto. You get an Alexa to have fun with life for what's ahead of you. And I think that was the best message I ever encountered in a night.
So the Alexa has great use. There is no question. But also your point is well taken. It's a new way to engage. It's not something that's innate that we've been brought up with, but it serves a very important person. And as you mentioned, this notion of being isolated is not only very painful, bad for your health, very significant health implications. So yes, the use of technology is really important. Looking at time because I share a story.
Are there any questions online? Feel free to put it into the chat or unmute yourself. And if not, we'll end with Helen.
I will tell a short story.
Yeah, with your story. Yeah. Okay.
So just give an example of the advancement in technology. I saw a presentation, and the Japanese are very advanced in using technology for older adults. As you know, they have a growing older population, and they don't have a lot of younger folks who are available to take care of them. And I saw a presentation where there was a robot and an older adult. Oh, yeah. And the robot went to the older adult's closet and selected what this woman should wear that was dependent on the temperature outdoors. That blew me away. I said, oh my goodness. I mean, that was some kind of judgment. So the use of robots in relationship to older adults and avoiding isolation is really, it's a market. It's a market. And I should add one of the hottest areas beside basic research in aging is technology. Age and technology is a hot topic. And a lot of the innovators are younger people. There is money to be made. There are a lot more of us than ever, okay? A lot more of us are getting older and will have different kinds of needs. And technology is waiting in the wings to develop something new that works for us. So with that, I think our time is up. Am I correct? So I want to thank you again. It's absolutely a joy to be with you and actually a privilege to be with you today. Thank you. Thank you.
Those online, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be concluding the workshop. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Or a wonderful day, sorry.